nature, by definition, is a voluntary process where parties come together. And the way that the question is posed is interesting to me because it suggests that there's a power of limitation by being neutral. And I don't see myself as being limited in the power of neutrality. In fact, I think that's very much empowering. And what it enables people to do is people oftentimes get lost in the idea that I've got a lawyer or I'm not the boss, when in fact the people are really the boss. And it kind of helps me to empower them to say, this is your show, you can decide whether or not this case settles. And if it doesn't, that's your choice as well. And it's a very empowering process in my mind, because it gives power to the right people who need to have it, which are the clients. So by not being an advocate for them, keeps my hands clean. I don't do a lot of, how does this make you feel? How does that make you feel? I try to be a little bit more engaged. I tend to give people my 2 cents, and then they can tell me whether they think I'm right or wrong, but it's entirely up to them as to whether or not they choose to work with it, or we find something in between. Oh, it's confidential. Confidentiality is definitely a key, and I use that in my opening presentation to the groups. I tell them that everything that's said in mediation is confidential, but even though it's said, it's not shrouded in secrecy. So if the case doesn't settle, there's other ways that the parties can access that information. It will come out. I have had very few mediations, and now I'm in my 6th year of mediation work, where somebody has asked me to keep something secret or confidential, and I haven't been able to talk them into sharing it at some point in time, because the whole purpose of mediation is to convey as much information as possible so you can resolve the case then and there. And usually people are keeping things secret. They have other ideas as to how they want to handle the case. But it's always better to talk about it. But if somebody says, yeah, I want you to keep it secret, then you're obligated to, and it's the highest duty. I think you come to the table no matter what you're doing with personal preferences, or if you want to call them biases, sure. I think and that is a huge challenge to not prejudge. You talk about prejudice, that's the root word is prejudgment. So I definitely come to the table with my history, my baggage, my biases, if you will, but you got to set those aside as best you can. I don't think an honest answer would be that you can ever totally set aside your history. That's what makes you up, and that's why people choose who you are. But hopefully you don't let that get in the way of resolving the case.
But he will kind of.
The mediator, kind of back to the first answer. The process itself is entirely voluntary, so the mediator doesn't have any power to force anybody to make a decision. The mediator doesn't have any power to force basically anything other than to try to keep things moving forward towards a negotiated settlement. It's very different than being a judge or being an arbitrator or a discovery referee. It's a whole hell of a lot more fun because you're letting the people craft their resolution, in my opinion. I guess it's the power of persuasion. A lot of mediators will say that they're not supposed to persuade people. They're supposed to be totally neutral, and I don't buy into that. I say that if you are working with people to try to get a case resolved, I don't think there's anything wrong with asking them questions that will challenge them, or and some people would say, persuade them to say, yeah, this is a good decision. You are making the right decision. Or on other occasions where, I think you might be making a wrong decision, and here's why. Most of the parties have their lawyers with them. So they've been advised on the law, they've been advised on the facts, but there may be something that they haven't thoroughly thought through. And oftentimes what I find
Well, people
not
are wonderful.
not in all
Consider
times, but sometimes the lawyers will miss the more humanitarian aspects of the cases. So the lawyers are hired to say, what's the law, what are my damages, what's recoverable, what's not recoverable, and if you're on the defense side, what's my exposure, how much do I need to pay, and so that's kind of their job. So I'm not bad-mouthing the lawyers. They're doing their job. But what's really cool about being a mediator is I can come in and touch on the touchy-feely side of things. And I can talk about emotions. I can talk about time frames. I can talk about spending time with family. I can talk, and there are lawyers that'll talk about that, but oftentimes that part has kind of been overlooked. And sometimes that's the very part that resolves a case, especially if you're getting down to the nitty-gritty. And you can tell somebody, this case is going to be done, you're going to be able to stop coming to depositions, you're going to be able to stop having to pick up your phone and talk to your lawyer, you're going to be able to spend time with your kids, your family, your loved ones, whatever. And that's got a real high value to most people, and yet it's not talked about all that much in the litigated setting.
Yes.
The only conflict of interest that I would have would be if I had represented somebody in a case before, or if I had a very close personal or professional relationship with them. And so what I need to do in that situation is disclose to everybody exactly, as much as possible, the nature of the relationship, how I know that person, what's going on. And if they decide that they want to use a different mediator, that's fine. But just be an open book. Say that again, sorry?
Under
Typically the attorneys, and the stereotypical mediation, we have an open session at the beginning of the mediation, but actually the way I like to do it is I actually contact people even before the mediation. I don't like surprises. And so it helps with making sure that there's not these surprises. So I will oftentimes contact the advocates or the lawyers ahead of time, find out what's going on with the case, get a little bit, and then also get a little bit of the backstory. These people have been dealing with this case for months, and I'm just picking it up right now. And so they'll know. I'll ask them about the personalities. I'll ask them about a lot of stuff that doesn't come across on paper. So that's the first time that the advocates will come in. And that's not to say you can be a self-represented and be your own advocate too. And I'll have those same conversations with whoever is advocating on whatever side. But then when we get to the session, we'll have a joint session. And it's funny, even the most aggressive attorneys in a mediated session usually don't have a very aggressive opening statement during the joint session, which is good because it's not intended. Mediation isn't supposed to be something where you have a lot of throwing darts across the table at one another. By the time we get there, most people know each other's positions and they try to be more conciliatory. In most cases, sometimes that's not always the case. And then the advocates will break out in separate caucuses, and the advocates are there to be the sounding board for the clients. And they are the ones who give the legal advice and the counsel to the parties as they go down the road towards making a settlement. And then after, hopefully, the case gets settled. And then afterwards, the advocates still have to tie up the loose ends. We'll usually sign a one-page, very brief settlement agreement so we can enforce it, because we have the parties there and we get their signatures. But then after that is done, most of the time, a more formal legal document in the form of a settlement agreement or release will be put together, and the advocates will usually do that. Filing up request for dismissals, closing documents with the court. If the parties work hard and want to resolve the case, and so the most important element of resolution is truly the parties. And so I guess if you had asked me as a mediator, how does that come into play? It's the ability to talk with the parties and get them comfortable in the setting because most people haven't been through a mediation before, and so they don't know what to expect. And if you're guarded and you're not comfortable, then you're probably not going to be able to put together the best resolution and get the case done and have a dialogue. So I think the most important part of any mediator, I guess in my mind, would be communication, primarily with the parties, but also with the advocates, and knowing how to get them to communicate either through you or directly to get the case done. That's the whole idea.
Dave.